Very good evening, friends. Meeting again in the session of philosophy. And yesterday we have finished one of the important chapter from Kant's philosophy, that is the homeopathic aggravation. It was a big chapter where he has explained many aspects of potency dilemma along with homeopathic aggravation. And today also we're going to start with one of the important chapter where he mentioned the remedy reactions. And those are most important aspects of the understanding the action of the remedy after once you give the first prescription. And that's why what to observe, how to observe, what to do, everything depends upon these. And that's why Kent has given all those 12 observations, and he has mentioned it in a with his lucid language, with a good examples, and those explains what exactly one should look for after giving the first prescription in the follow-ups. And that's why this chapter, that chapter number 35, is very important from practice point of view, as well as for the students. It is also important because it carries 20 marks in the exams. Describe in detail the remedy reactions, or describe in detail the prognosis after observing the action of the remedy. So this itself becomes one of the full question over there. So we'll start directly with this chapter, chapter number 35, prognosis after observing the action of the remedy. After a prescription has been made, the physician commences to make observations. The whole future of the patient may depend upon the conclusions that the physician arrives at from these observations. For his action depends very much upon his observations, and upon his action depends the good of the patient. See, what he starts to introduce the chapter, he starts with that if once you prescribe the remedy, then then you have to start with the observing the patient, and you should be very much knowledgeable regarding the things what to observe and how to observe, because that defines the action what you have to do next, whether to repeat the remedy, whether not to repeat the remedy, whether to give another remedy, whether to antidote the remedy. There are many things which we have to think. The action, your action depends upon your observation, and that's why observation plays very vital role. If he is not conversant, conversant means familiar. If he is not conversant with the import of what he sees, he will undertake to do wrong things. He will make wrong prescriptions. He will change his medicines and do things in detriment of the patient. Detriment means it is destructible or hanikarak, which is disturbing the patient. So what he says, if you don't know what to observe, what exactly, you don't have a knowledge exactly what are the things which you have to look for, then automatically, if you don't know, your action becomes wrong. And once action becomes wrong, you go on changing the remedy or you give wrong remedy, and it will be a disturbing to the patient's recovery. There is absolutely but one way, and nothing can take place of intelligence. So what he says, there is only one way that you should be intelligent. So that is one quality the homeopath should have. If we talk with great many physicians concerning the observations you have made after giving the remedy, you will find that the majority of them have only whims and notions on this subject and see nothing after the prescription is made. And this is the problem with the homeopathic physicians. Many times they prescribe the right remedy, but they don't know what to do next. The question arises over there. Now what to do? Whether to repeat, whether not to repeat, whether to give another remedy, whether to increase the potency, many things. And if you don't know what to observe, then how can you decide? Then how can you go ahead? It is not possible. Once you know the things, then you can. Otherwise, it is not possible. And this is what Kent explains over there, that each physician should be intelligent enough for observing those reactions. These observations I am going to give you have grown out of much watchfulness, long waiting and watching. So what he will going to discuss, that those will be the Kant's own observations regarding things. Few of them have been explained by the by the Robert also. We have discussed that already. And those are given even in Organon by in the sixth edition of Organon by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann. But they are very properly arranged and explained by the Kent in his chapter. And these reactions or these specific observations after prescribing first remedy, those are very much intelligence or intelligent observations done by Kent, and that's why he says these are the things which are very useful for you. If the homeopathic physician is not an accurate observer, his observations will indefinite, and if his observations are indefinite, his prescribing is indefinite. So you are not sure about the prescribing once your observations are not sure. And that's why you have to learn the lesson of observing the patient after the first remedy is given. Now he starts. It is taken for granted after a prescription has been made, and it is an accurate prescription that it has acted. Now, if the medicine is acting, it commences immediately to affect the changes in the patient, and these changes are shown by signs and symptoms. So, many times it happens you prescribe remedy and you feel that you have given a very accurate remedy. Kent says if you have given right remedy, it starts acting, it starts showing the changes, and those are reflected in signs and symptoms. The inner nature of the disease appears to the physician through the symptoms, and it is like watching the hands upon the clock. This watching and waiting and observing has to be done by the physician in order that he may judge by the changes what to do and what not to do. So you have to go with this method, that exactly you have to go on observing, watching the patient, observing the changes, noticing everything what have happened after giving the remedy, and then you are able to decide what to do next. It is true that homeopathy is not long in doubt in many instances what not to do. There is always an index that tells him that what not to do. If he is sharp and vigilant observer, vigilant means very careful observer. If he is a sharp and vigilant observer, he will see the index for every case. Of course, if the prescription is not related to the case, if it is a prescription that effects not no changes, it does not take long to see what to do. Much patient waiting for foolish prescription is but loss of time, and that should be taken into account among the observation. The observations taken after specific remedy has been given sufficiently related to the case to cause changes in the symptoms are those of value. So he says that if you are random in observation and if you are not careful in observation, many times you go towards very wrong prescription. It is harmful on the part of patient, and it is harmful from your practice point of view. And that's why one should be very, very careful and observable, vigilant in order to understand what is happening after giving the first remedy. And those he will going to teach in this specific big chapter. And this chapter teaches us a lot. It will take 4 or 5 lectures to learn, but this chapter is really useful in practice. Now he starts. The changes are beginning. What are they like? What do they mean? To what do they amount? See what he says. The changes are beginning. What are they like? What do they mean? And what do they amount? These 3 questions you have to put. The physicians must know when he listens to the reports of the patient what is going on. So when patient comes for follow-up, what is first important question which you have to put is what is going on? How are you? First question, and you start listening, you have to listen carefully. The remedy is known to act by changing of symptoms, the disappearance of the symptoms, the increase of symptoms, the amelioration of the symptoms, the order of symptoms. These are all 4 points which you have to take into consideration. So first is disappearance of the symptoms. Number 2 is increase of symptoms. Number 3 is amelioration of the symptoms. And number 4 is the change in the order of symptoms. Are the changes or all changes from the remedy, and these changes are to be studied. So here you have to focus. So whenever you have made a first prescription, you have to focus on those four points. So whether the symptoms have disappeared, whether they are increased, whether they are decreased, whether there is a change in direction. So all those things matters a lot, because on the basis of which you come to certain conclusion, and once you come to the conclusion, then you can decide how to go ahead. Among the commonest thing that remedies do is to aggravate or ameliorate. So common is either patient's complaints are aggravated or ameliorated. The aggravation is of two kinds. We may have an aggravation which is an aggravation of the disease, in which patient is growing worse, and we may have an aggravation of symptoms in which patient is growing better. So there are two types of aggravation. In one, the patient's symptoms might have recovered, but patient is getting worse. He is not feeling well at the general level. It is taking a wrong direction. It is going in wrong way. That is one thing. Or second, there might be his original disease symptoms might get aggravated, but at general level he started feeling better. So these are two different things which you have to take into consideration. That is what is called as an homeopathic aggravation. An aggravation of the disease means that patient is growing weaker, the symptoms are growing stronger, but the true homeopathic aggravation, which is the aggravation of the symptoms of the patient while the patient is growing better, is something that the physician observes after a true homeopathic prescription. The true homeopathic aggravation, I say, is when the symptoms are worse, but patient says, I feel better. So here he explains exactly when the symptoms those takes wrong direction, or if there are appearances of the new symptoms in the case, and patient is getting weaker and weaker, that aggravation is the medicinal aggravation, and it is wrong. But second thing, if patient is feeling better at a general level and his original symptoms of the disease are getting increased, then we label that as an homeopathic aggravation. We must know, we must now go into the particulars concerning these states as to the time and place, as to how the aggravation occurs, as to how the amelioration occurs, as to the duration, etc. So everything you have to look for, whether there is an aggravation, whether there is an amelioration, whether aggravation is there, whether how much time it persists, in how much duration it remains, everything which you have to take into consideration. The aggravations and ameliorations, the directions of the symptoms, and many other things have to come up and be observed, and judgment has to be passed upon. So what he says, the aggravations and ameliorations, the directions of the symptoms, and many things have to come up and be observed, and judgment is to be passed upon. Means whether the patient is getting aggravated, whether he is getting ameliorated, how much better he feel after taking the medicine, in which direction the symptoms are going, whether they are going from less important organ to more important organ, or whether they are going from more important organ to the less important organ, everything which you have to take into consideration. Then he says, first of all, the patient should be the aim of the physician. His whole idea should be centered upon the patient to determine whether he is improving or declining. We have to judge by the symptoms to know that this is taking place. Very often the patient will say, I am growing weaker. And yet you may know that what he says is not true. So certainly can you rely upon the symptoms and their story, which is more faithful than the patient's opinion. Many times patient will say, Doctor, I am so much worse, and yet you examine into his symptoms and you find that he is really doing very well. Just the moment that he finds out that you are encouraged, he feels better and rouses up and wants to eat. So it is always a matter of judgment whenever you takes the follow. Many times patient never gives you a right idea. Sometimes they are saying they are very good, but instead when you examine, you will find that they are getting worse. Sometimes it happens vice versa. That patient is saying that, doctor, I am not feeling at all better. I am getting worse. And if you examine or if you go through symptom by symptom, you will observe that patient is feeling better. So you have to much more rely upon the symptoms which you have gathered in the first consultation. And then one by one, you have to take into consideration and you have to ask the patient, how is this symptom? How is this symptom? What has happened with this symptom? If you take it in detail, then you will exactly know what has happened with the patient, what remedy has produced in the patient. And that's why follow-up, it should not be a casual enough, it should be proper enough. By the symptoms also, you can tell when the patient is really weaker, and if the symptoms are taking an inward rather than outward course, you will know, even if he is encouraged, that there is no encouragement for him. We have in the symptoms that which we can rely upon. In the old school, we have nothing but information of the patient, and this is of little account after making the homeopathic prescription. The symptoms themselves must be corroborated. Corroborated म्हणजे gives the strength, बळकटी आणणे, एखाद्या गोष्टीला बळकटी आणणे. The symptoms themselves must be corroborated. The patient's opinion must be corroborated by the symptom. The symptoms do corroborate what the patient say in many instances, but symptoms are the physician's most satisfactory evidence. Now he explains over there that you should not just depend upon what patient says, because sometimes it is his own interpretation, might be wrong, might be right. But if you give or if you observe the symptoms one by one and compare it with the early stage or in during the first prescription and now, and analyze them, then you will get the real story, what has happened with the patient after giving the first remedy. So he is giving you the method how to go ahead and what to look for. This is too important that you must look. Yes, these are the things which have changed. So direction of the disease that you are going to notice over there. There might be you're going to find it out the intensity of the symptoms, whether the new symptoms have been added, whether which symptoms have disappeared, everything which you are going to look for, and that matters a lot. And then he says, another general remark needs to be made, namely that we should know by the symptom if the changes occurring are sufficiently interior. If the changes that are occurring are exterior, the physician must be acquainted with the meaning of them, so that he will know by that whether the disease is being healed from the innermost or whether the symptoms have merely changed according to their superficial nature. Incurable diseases will very often be palliated by mild medicines that act only superficially, act upon sensorium, act upon senses, and though the hidden and deep-seated trouble goes on and progresses and is sometimes made worse, yet the patient is made comfortable. So that by the symptoms we can know whether the changes that are occurring are of sufficient depth, so that the patient may recover. The direction that symptoms are taking is sufficient to tell that, especially in the chronic disease. So what he explains over there is the what exactly you have to do. You must go on observing what is happening after giving the remedy. Whether the original symptoms of the disease they have increased, whether there are new symptoms which have aroused, whether the certain symptoms have been disappeared, whether the symptoms are going from less important organ to more important organ, whether the pathology is increasing. Everything you have to take into consideration in order to understand what is exactly happening after the first prescription. And if you give this specific entity, then you can act, then you can decide what to do. And then further he says, a patient walks into the clinic somewhat stoop-shouldered with a hacking cough that he has had for good many years. You judge by his looks that he has been sick a good while. His face is sickly, he is lean and anxious, he is careworn, he is suffering from the poverty, poor clothing, and scanty food. Now, you examine all of his symptoms and they clearly indicate that he needs an antisoric, or the symptoms are covered by, by an antisoric. And from the history of the case, you know he had needed it a good while. Upon prolonged examination, the antisoric you have in mind is strengthened. You now examine his chest and discover that he has not the expansion that he ought to have. And you detect the presence of tuberculosis, and you may feeble pulse and many other corroborating symptoms. You ascertain that the patient has been steadily declining. You give the medicine and he comes back in few days with quite a sharp aggravation of the symptom. He has an increased cough. He has night sweats. He is more feeble. Now the homeopathic physician likes to hear that. He likes to hear of an exacerbation of symptom. But this patient comes back in a week and the aggravation is still present and is somewhat on the increase. The patient is coughing worse and expectoration is more troublesome than ever. His night sweats have been going on. He comes back at the end of second week and he's still worse. And all the symptoms have been worse since he took that medicine. He was comparatively comfortable before he took that medicine. But at the end of fourth week, he is steadily growing worse. There has been no amelioration following this aggravation, and he is evidently declining. He now cannot come to the office for he is so weak. So now he is explaining the first observation, that the continuous aggravation of the patient with final decline of the patient. In this paragraph, he tried to explain that if you find that you have given remedy and patient is going worse, you examine him, you clinically verify it, and you know that patient is a tuberculosis patient and you had given medicine, and patient comes within a week and meets you and he is absolutely become weak and he is sweating a lot at night, doesn't have an appetite, his generalities are not improving and he is declining and declining, and that indicates that your remedy has not acted properly. In fact, patient is going in wrong direction. Patient is becoming more and more worse. So that is first observation which you have to be, you should be very careful and observe what is exactly happening. And this is first observation, that after giving a first prescription, there might be a continuous aggravation and followed by final decline of the patient. That we're going to learn in tomorrow's, not tomorrow, on Monday's session regarding this. So with next paragraph, he starts with the exact observations, right from first observation to 12 observation. So next lecture, we'll start learning those 12 observations. So we have finished main introductory part of this chapter, specifically over here. Next time, we'll start directly with the specifically with this those Kent's 12 observation. Today there will be no lecture in of the Materia Medica. We'll directly meet on Monday and we'll start with the group remedies on Monday's session. So that's all for today, and we'll meet definitely on Monday evening. First for Organon lecture, and then for the Materia Medica. So thank you being there, and meet again on Monday. Good evening.
Thank you, sir. Have a good evening.